The whole world remembers Rome for its gladius swords, its towering scutum shields, and the impenetrable testudo formation. But listen closely. The real weapon that allowed Rome to conquer half the known world wasn't steel, wasn't gold, wasn't even brilliant generals. It was dry bread, a bowl of porridge, and a flask of sour vinegar. Yes, an empire that swallowed Egypt, crushed Carthage, and brought Gaul to its knees was fueled by meals we wouldn't even call food today. Picture this, an army marching 20 miles a day, each soldier hauling 80 pounds of gear, and at night, grinding raw wheat by hand just to make a meal. No sweet wine, no juicy steak-only grain, rock-hard biscuits, and watered-down vinegar. If that sounds unbelievable, stay with me. Because the true secret that fed the greatest empire of the ancient world and echoes across the entire history of the Roman Empire was hidden in the humble camp pot of the common legionary. But what exactly was inside that pot, and why did it matter more than steel? Let's start with the myths and the reality. When we talk about Rome, the stories sound larger than life. Iron discipline of the legions, monumental works like the Colosseum, or roads that still stand today, and battlefield triumphs that made Rome master of the ancient world. But there's a truth few admit, none of it discipline. Monuments, victories could exist if the soldier didn't have the energy to even stand upright. You could have the perfect testudo formation, but on an empty stomach. The legion would collapse before ever seeing the enemy. You could have a genius general, but without food. His grand strategy would remain nothing but ink on parchment. Rome triumphed not just because of the sword, but because of what fed the hand that held it. And that truth pulls us away from the glory of the battlefield, into the most ordinary but most decisive place of all. Set aside the sword and the shield for a moment. Now, step with me into the field kitchen of the Roman legions, where the real fate of the empire was decided. And at the heart of that kitchen, a single ingredient so simple, yet so powerful. It fueled centuries of conquest. Let's uncover it. So what truly powered an empire? The answer is simple, almost too simple, yet nothing short of genius. Grain, not sizzling cuts of meat, not fresh vegetables, but hard, dry kernels of wheat. Why grain? Because it carried three powers no other food in the ancient world could match. First, endurance. A handful of wheat could deliver enough calories for a soldier to march 20 miles in a day, carrying 80 pounds on his back, and still have the strength to dig trenches and build camp by nightfall. It wasn't a burst of energy like meat, it was steady, sustained fuel, exactly what an army needed for endless campaigns. Second, cheap and scalable. Grain could be planted across the empire, from the fertile floodplains of Egypt, to the golden fields of Sicily, to the sun-baked farms of North Africa. These weren't just conquered lands, they were Rome's giant breadbaskets, existing to feed the capital and its armies. Third, easy to store and move. Dry kernels could sit in Rome's massive Horea warehouses for months, even years, without spoiling, packed into sacks and loaded on wagons, stacked into the holds of ships. An entire legion could be resupplied with nothing more than grain. No other food could compete, and Rome turned this into a system. Taxes weren't just collected in money, they were collected in wheat. Farmers handed over their grain, and those very kernels ended up straight in the bellies of soldiers. No middlemen, no detours, a closed-loop supply machine. On average, a legionary received about 850 grams of grain a day, nearly 3 Roman pounds. It sounds like a lot, but on campaign, a soldier could burn up to 6,000 calories a day. That ration alone supplied nearly half of what he needed to survive and fight. Now picture this. After 10 hours of marching under the blazing sun, legs heavy, stomach growling, a soldier sits down, opens his kit not to find a warm loaf or a ready-to-eat ration, but a sack of raw wheat. Before he can eat, he drags out a heavy handmill, grinding stone against stone, just to make flour for his meal. That grinding sound, it was the daily rhythm of Roman military life. Today, American soldiers on deployment rip open an MRE meal ready to eat, add water, heat it, and you're done. But the Roman legionary, he was also an MRE warrior. Only his ration wasn't a modern sealed pouch. It was raw, unprocessed grain, nothing more. And from those humble kernels, Rome built an empire. But raw grain was only the beginning. The real question is, how did soldiers actually eat it? The answer takes us into three very different lives of grain. Picture this, a Roman soldier with a sack of raw kernels. He has three ways to turn those seeds into life. Three forms of grain, three heartbeats that kept an empire going. First, pulse the thick porridge. It's the simplest, oldest, most familiar meal. Coarsely ground wheat or spelt simmered with water and a pinch of salt until it turns soft and dense. Add a few crumbs of hard cheese, a clove of garlic, a handful of wild greens, maybe a scrap of salted pork in a bland pot becomes a hot, nourishing, easy-to-digest dinner. After a long day on the road, a bowl of pulse doesn't just fill the stomach, it warms the body like a small embrace from home in a cold, distant camp. Second, bucellatum, the soldier's rock bread. This is the true marching ration, the ancestor of every hardtack that came after. The Romans milled the grain, mixed it with water and salt, baked it into flat discs or rings, then baked it again. The moisture was driven out completely, leaving a brick, hard biscuit tough enough to chip a tooth if you bit it dry. So how did they eat it? They soaked it in water, in sharp pasca, vinegar water, or in broth, softening it back to something like porridge. Bucellatum was portable energy. It didn't mold, it didn't spoil. It could survive for months in a marching bag. A few pieces could carry a unit through forests and over mountains without starving. Third, the soldiers' field bread, a coarse, dense loaf baked in camp ovens when logistics allowed. Later, writers call it panis militaris, a reminder that fresh bread in camp meant stability and strong supply. In larger forts, soldiers could bake real bread in stone ovens, coarse, dense, heavy with bran, often unleavened, but warm and fragrant. Sometimes squads even built small clay ovens for themselves. Eating panis militaris meant more than feeling full. It proved the legion was well supplied and the system still humming. A fresh loaf in a Roman hand was the stamp of order and organization, the edge that set Rome apart from its enemies. For Americans, this sounds familiar. During the Civil War, soldiers on both sides lived on rock-hard hardtack, often cracking it on a rifle butt before soaking it. 2,000 years apart, the soldier's table still teaches the same truth, one visible across the entire history of the Roman Empire. Wars aren't decided by weapons alone, but by rations. So if you were standing in a Roman camp, what would you choose? A steaming bowl of pulse, fragrant with cheese and garlic? Or a slab of unyielding bucellatum, harsh? Yes, but the kind of fuel that gets you through another day's march? Think carefully, because sometimes that choice is what keeps an empire alive. But grain alone couldn't quench thirst on a 20-mile march under the Mediterranean sun. For that, Rome had its own version of a sports drink. Picture a summer's day in Asia Minor, the sun blazing, dust clinging to armor, the legion trudging after more than 20 miles on the road. A soldier drops his pack, lifts the small flask at his side, and takes a swig. Not wine, not clean water, but pasca. So what was pasca? A simple mix: water and sour wine vinegar, the cheap, undrinkable kind nobody else wanted. Sometimes sweetened with a touch of honey, or flavored with herbs like mint or coriander. To us, it sounds like punishment. To a Roman soldier, it was life. First purification. River water, pond water, it could carry dysentery, plague, or worse. but a splash of acetic acid from vinegar killed much of the danger. With Pascha, dirty water became safe water. Second, hydration. That sour bite made the mouth water, easing thirst faster than plain water ever could. Under the Mediterranean sun, one gulp of Pascha could feel cooler than a cup of spring water. Third, hydration support. Vinegar's mild acidity made unsafe water drinkable, and its sharp taste encouraged hydration. It wasn't a vitamin tonic, but it was practical, cheap, and life-saving in many ways. Pascha was the field-safe hydrator of antiquity, Rome's answer to a sports drink. The image is unforgettable. After 10 hours of marching, a Roman soldier, exhausted, parched, takes a sip of Pascha. That one mouthful stretches his body just far enough to push another mile. And there's a human detail that lifts Pascha beyond the battlefield. In the Gospels, when Christ hung on the cross, a Roman soldier offered him a sponge soaked in Pascha. It wasn't mockery, it was compassion. He was sharing the same humble drink that sustained Rome's armies, the drink of nameless soldiers. Pascha wasn't just vinegar water, it was proof that sometimes an empire doesn't stand on fine wine or banquets of kings. Sometimes it stands on a flask of diluted vinegar and the iron will of the men who drank it. Yet no soldier could live on bread and vinegar forever. To keep spirits high and muscles strong, they needed one more thing: meat. Grain could fuel a legion, but it couldn't keep a warrior strong or his spirit steady without one more thing: meat. In the official ration, pork reigned supreme. The reason was pure pragmatism. Pigs grew quickly, ate almost anything, and produced fatty, calorie-rich meat. Most important of all, pork was easy to preserve. With just salt or smoke, the Romans could turn fresh cuts into bacon and salted slabs that lasted for weeks, even months. And sometimes, a single scrap of salted pork dropped into a pot of pulse was enough to transform bland porridge into a hot, hearty dinner, a boost of strength for the next day's march. But Rome didn't stop there. Marching with the legions were herds of cattle, goats, and sheep. These herds were the living cans of antiquity. When needed, they were slaughtered on the spot, delivering fresh protein straight to the campfire. No refrigeration, no problem. Rome had already invented the idea of bringing the meat supply on the march. For Americans, the image isn't far off from beef jerky tucked in a modern soldier's pack or Spam cans stacked high in World War II supply chains. A thread stretches across 2,000 years, from a pot of pulse enriched by a scrap of salted pork, to a battlefield meal built from a tin of canned meat. For the Roman soldier, protein wasn't just nutrition, it was reward, it was morale, it was the rare comfort of feeling like he was eating real food after endless days of hard bread and sour vinegar water. But even with meat, something vital was missing: vitamins and fiber. Without them, the toughest legionary would break down, and that's where vegetables and beans enter the story. But no army could survive forever on hard bread and salted meat. Calories might keep legs moving, but vitamins and fiber kept bodies from breaking down. And the Romans understood this early. In every ration, hearty vegetables came first: onions, garlic, cabbage, not only for flavor, but as natural medicine. Romans believed garlic gave strength and warded off disease. They weren't wrong. Both garlic and onions carry antibacterial properties. In many cases, a sack of vegetables was worth more than a slab of meat. Then came the dried beans, lentils, peas, chickpeas. They could be stored for months, packed with protein and fiber, simmered into thick, filling stews that warmed entire cohorts through the winter. When legions settled into long-term camps, soldiers often planted gardens: lettuce, cucumbers, leafy greens sprouting right beside their tents. Fresh vegetables weren't just food, they were a sign of stability, a taste of home, and a quiet reminder that life could be more than marching and war. And when Rome pushed into the frontiers, foraging became a survival art. Most legionaries came from farms they knew how to spot edible wild herbs, gather berries, dig roots, and collect mushrooms. Forests and fields became their natural supermarket. Sometimes a handful of berries or a clutch of mushrooms meant the difference between hunger and survival. The lesson is clear. The health of an army wasn't just measured in calories, it was measured in balance. Vitamins, fiber, vegetables, small things that acted as an invisible shield, protecting the legions from disease and exhaustion. Still, survival food isn't enough. To turn fuel into a real meal, the Romans discovered a secret flavor weapon, their Holy Trinity. Think about it. How long could you survive on nothing but bland porridge and rock-hard bread? Even the toughest warrior needs a spark of flavor to make a meal worth swallowing. And the Romans discovered a flavor trinity, three simple elements that turned survival rations into something resembling a real meal. First, salt. In a world without refrigerators, salt was the #1 preservative. It kept meat from rotting, turned fish into salted fish, pork into bacon. But beyond preservation, it gave food taste, made it palatable, even desirable. Its importance was so great that the very word salary comes from the Latin salarium. It's often explained as a salt allowance, though scholars debate the exact link. What's certain is that salt was a strategic resource and essential for preservation and flavor. Second, olive oil. For Rome and the Mediterranean world, olive oil was everything. It added calories and richness to porridge, served for frying, mixing, even for rubbing on skin to protect against sun and wind. A ration of good quality oil wasn't just food, it was proof the supply system was working, a sign the legion was strong. And finally, garum. This was Rome's secret weapon at the dinner table, a fermented fish sauce strange to us. But to the Romans, it was what ketchup, hot sauce, or soy sauce is to us today. Small fish, mixed with guts and blood, salted and left under the sun for months. The result? A dark, salty liquid packed with protein, minerals, and that elusive fifth flavor, umami. Just a drop of garum could transform a bland pot of pulse into a dish bursting with flavor, evoking memories of the Mediterranean coast. For a soldier freezing in distant Britain, one spoonful of garum was more than a condiment, it was a taste of home. And if you think about it, the picture feels familiar. Some Americans can't sit down to a meal without ketchup. Others won't eat without a splash of Tabasco. For the Roman legionary, a jar of garum in a clay amphora was no less vital his emotional seasoning, his connection back to Rome. It was this holy trinity, salt, olive oil, and garum that kept a soldier's rations from being just fuel and turned them into something with soul. But flavor alone couldn't win wars. To keep an empire marching, Rome needed something far bigger, an invisible weapon that held the whole system together. When people think of Rome's power, they picture those straight stone roads stretching across the empire. But few realize those roads weren't just for legions on the march. They were for bread, salted pork, and jars of pasca traveling with them. Imagine it, a convoy of hundreds of mules, their backs loaded with sacks of grain, jars of olive oil, barrels of vinegar, hooves pounding stone, dust rising, wooden wheels grinding against the cobblestones. That was the bloodstream that kept the Roman army alive, an infrastructure that, taken together, underpinned the entire history of the Roman Empire. At the heart of it all were the Horia, vast warehouses built along Rome's frontiers and in key provinces. Inside, grain, wine, and oil were stored for months, sometimes years. When a legion marched far from home, all it had to do was reach a Horea, refill its supplies, and push forward. Rome's supply chain flowed through three channels: central shipments from Italy and from breadbasket provinces like Egypt, North Africa, and Sicily. This was the lifeline, ensuring the legions never lacked wheat. Local procurement. The army bought food directly from locals, pumping money into provincial economies, a way of turning conquered subjects into stakeholders of Rome. Forced requisition. In the heat of war, Rome simply took what it needed: swift, effective, but it planted seeds of lasting resentment. This combination made Rome a machine capable of sustaining tens of thousands of troops, thousands of miles from home. Americans know this story too. The interstate highway system wasn't just built for family road trips, it was designed by the Pentagon to move troops and supplies in wartime. The U.S. military has entire branches devoted to logistics, making sure every MRE and every gallon of fuel reaches the right place at the right time. Rome understood the same truth. A legion is only as strong as its stomach. And that's why logistics wasn't just background work, it was the invisible weapon that kept Rome standing for 1,000 years. Yet even the strongest supply lines could fail. That's why every soldier carried his own survival kit and related on his brothers in the smallest unit of all. Rome's logistics may have been legendary, but the legions knew they couldn't rely forever on mule trains and supply wagons. Every legionary had to shoulder part of his own survival. In his marching pack, he carried enough grain for 3 days, a heavy handmill to grind it, a small pot for cooking, and a flask for mixing pasta. No soldier was allowed to depend entirely on someone else because the survival of the entire legion started with the discipline of each individual. But Rome also knew no man could endure long in isolation. That's why they created the contubernium, the smallest unit of the Roman army. 8 men sharing a tent, sharing one pot, sharing every meal. By day, they marched side by side. By night, they sat around the fire, grinding grain, stoking flames, passing around spoonfuls of steaming pulse. 8 strangers slowly became a family bound together not just by weapons, but by the simple ritual of breaking bread. For Americans, the contubernium was Rome's version of a fire team, a small unit, but the foundation of everything. At that scale, discipline was enforced, morale was built, and only then could the massive machine of the legion function as one. In the clatter of handmills and the bubbling of porridge, Rome found a way to turn 8 individuals into an inseparable whole. But the legions also knew discipline wasn't enough. To keep morale alive, they had one more secret: feasts and food as rewards. Life as a Roman soldier was brutal, but it wasn't all hardtack and bland porridge. Every now and then, the rations changed, and those moments kept morale from breaking. During great festivals like Saturnalia or the emperor's birthday, the daily bread and porridge routine gave way to good wine, fresh meat often from sacrificial animals, and higher quality bread. These feasts transformed the camp into a gathering place, reminding soldiers they were part of something greater than themselves, the empire itself. But rewards weren't only for holidays. Even in daily life, food was currency for recognition. A unit that distinguished itself in battle might be granted extra wine, cheese, or a cut of meat. Simple. Yes, but crystal clear. Food was the language of honor. And on the far frontiers, soldiers still craved flavors of home. Letters discovered at Vindolanda in Britain show soldiers buying luxuries like pepper, and perhaps even comforts like honey and other spices. These little extras made camp food less dull and brought back the taste of Rome. The U.S. military carries the same tradition, even on distant deployments. Thanksgiving is observed with turkey, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie. A shared meal is the simplest way to remind soldiers they're not alone, that they're part of a larger family. For the Romans. As for Americans, a communal feast could be more powerful than any speech because it filled the stomach first, and through it, reached the heart. But what happened when the supply line snapped, and there were no feasts, no rewards, nothing? That's when Rome fell into the cuisine of desperation. But Rome's logistics machine wasn't flawless. When the supply line snapped, an entire legion plunged into what we can only call the cuisine of desperation. At first, they turned to whatever nature offered, digging up roots, gathering wild greens, picking berries, catching fish, frogs, even crayfish from streams. These weren't meals, just tricks to fool the stomach for one more day of survival. When things grew worse, the very animals that served the army became dinner. The mules that hauled wagons, the oxen that pulled carts, even the prized cavalry horses. To slaughter a war horse was the clearest sign of despair, sacrificing an asset that, militarily, was worth its weight in gold. History gives us grim proof. At the siege of Alesia, Caesar's men who had encircled the Gauls were themselves cut off. With rations dwindling, they risked dangerous foraging near the fortifications, snatching what little grain they could under threat of enemy attack. They truly traded blood for bread. And worse still, during Mark Antony's Parthian campaign, Plutarch describes starving soldiers boiling leather, eating roots, even slaughtering pack animals. He also reports rumors of cannibalism among the most desperate, though such accounts remain contested. Horrifying? Yes, but not unique to Rome. Modern wars tell the same story. When supply chains collapse, American, German, Russian soldiers alike have been forced into survival mode, living off foraged food, improvised meals, and things no one would normally consider edible. The cuisine of desperation reminds us, behind Rome's glorious victories lay moments when legions trembled on the edge of starvation. And sometimes, what determined survival wasn't sword or shield, but a handful of roots, or a pot of broth boiled from leather straps. And yet, even after such extremes, myths about Roman soldiers persist. So let's bust a few of the biggest ones. It's time to shatter a few myths about the Roman soldier we all grew up believing. Rome conquered with steel. The truth? Steel was only half the story. The other half was logistics, the roads, the Herrea warehouses, and the sacks of grain on every soldier's back. A gladius is useless if the stomach holding it is empty. Roman soldiers lived on meat. Sounds heroic, but wrong. They were carbohydrate-powered machines fueled by grain, thick porridge, and rock-hard buccellatum biscuits. Meat was extra. Bread was the real fuel of empire. They drank fine wine like aristocrats. Not true. Their daily drink was pasca, cheap, sour wine vinegar mixed with water. Harsh, unrefined, but safe. While officers toasted with vintage wine, the common legionary gulped down pasca to keep marching under a burning sun. These truths show us something deeper. Rome wasn't built on shining myths, but on pragmatic, efficient, and often brutally simple solutions. And those solutions still matter today. In fact, the lessons of Rome echo directly into the modern U.S. military. The story of the Roman soldier's cooking pot isn't just 2,000 years old, it carries timeless lessons. Energy is combat power. A soldier can carry sword, shield, and armor, but without enough calories to keep moving. All of it is worthless. Logistics is victory. From Rome's stone-paved roads to America's interstate highways, wars are not only won on the battlefield, but in the ability to deliver bread, water, and ammunition to the right place at the right time. And above all, pragmatism, organization, adaptability. The Romans lived by these three principles. So does the U.S. military. Practical, structured, and adaptable under any circumstance. That's how empires endure. If Roman soldiers had bucellatum and pasca, American soldiers have the MRE, the modern field ration. One side ate crushed grain, hard bread, and watered vinegar. The other eats pasta packs, canned meat, and energy bars. 2,000 years apart. But the spirit is the same. Feed the soldier. Fuel the victory. The eternal lesson is simple. Empires are built not only by the sword, but by bread. And that leads us to the final truth when you strip away the myths and the glory. What truly built Rome was both sword and bread. Rome is so often remembered in steel, the gladius, the unbreakable testudo, the triumphal arches gleaming in victory. But look closer and you'll see a simpler truth, one that threads through the entire history of the Roman Empire. That empire was built not only by the sword, but by bread. The coarse loaf, the bubbling pot of pulse, the rock-hard bucellatum, the sharp tang of pasca, they sound humble, even harsh. Yet it was these that kept soldiers' legs marching, kept their sword hands steady, and carried Rome through more than 1,000 years. Now pause for a moment. Imagine yourself a legionary, far from home, worn down after a day's endless march. You sit by the fire with 7 comrades, passing around a steaming bowl of porridge, flavored with garlic, cheese, and the smoke of burning wood. What would you remember most? The roar of battle, the fleeting glow of triumph, or that quiet moment, the warmth of pulse, the unspoken bond of brotherhood, and the simple relief of surviving one more day? Sometimes, it's the simplest things that become the foundation of a great empire. And if you think this is where the story ends, think again. Because every army, in every age, had its own secret rations. And those stories are next. If the story of the Roman soldier's meal made you realize that empires aren't built only with swords and shields, but also with porridge, hard bread, and a sip of sour vinegar, then hit like and subscribe to continue this journey with me. Because there are more secrets waiting to be uncovered. There was an army that survived on nothing but a few drops of horse's blood. Another that turned brutal diets into the forge of invincible warriors. And modern soldiers who helped shape world history with nothing more than canned meat and a crust of hard bread. Every civilization has a hidden story inside a soldier's pot, and it is around those campfires that history is cooked, one day at a time. Stay with me because this journey has only just begun.